All right. Hey YouTube, I'm Lucky, and in today's video, I'm going to be covering the PvE meta topic for Season 14 in Destiny 2. Now, this is a huge, comprehensive topic. I mean, I could sit here and I could talk to you for easily for 2 hours, talking to you about buffs, debuffs, the strongest classes, the strongest exotic armor pieces, the strongest exotic weapons, god rolls of legendary weapons, so on and so forth. I could literally talk to you for so long about this topic, but I'm going to bring this video to you as concise and as simply as possible, and this will especially apply to Vault of Glass if you're trying to beat it in the first 24 hours or just beat it at all in general. You know, these weapons will definitely be a huge factor, a huge play into the Vault of Glass. I'm going to go over a variety of different weapons and exotics and talk about the stuff that has changed a little bit with Season 14 because we've seen some significant changes. So the first thing I want to talk about is these hunter boots are nasty, okay? The Star Eater scales are super strong, and we're going to see a ton of people using these. I mean, it might very well be the meta. Right now, everyone's kind of on a hot craze with it, but it might be the meta in Vault of Glass, like 1 Titan Bubble and 5 Star Eater scales. I mean, it's that crazy of an exotic, right? It might be to that level. We shall see. Time will tell. I feel like you're going to at least probably want 3 of these on your Vault of Glass team, but we'll see. Right now, these are super hot and super strong, and a lot of people are using Hunter and using this exotic boots for that reason. They're very, very good. They give you a huge debuff with top tree tether. It might even be bugged. The way it works, it seems to be bugged, but the buff that it gives you is just off the charts, really strong. So keep that in mind, that in terms of meta, you're going to see a lot of people using these. Now, in terms of getting a buff, so you have buffs and debuffs, right? And they over counter each other, right? So you can't have multiple buffs. You can't have just like 10 buffs stacked together. You know, whichever buff is the strongest buff is the one you go for. So for example, like people put down a bubble and you go in the bubble and you get weapons of light. That's probably the most common buff. And then you have a debuff. You can use things like divinity is really common. You can use tether, tractor, I believe, and all variety of different other things for debuffs. But for this video, I'm going to talk to you mostly about the meta, and I want to break this down into a few different topics, right? So you've got low-end PvE and you've got high-end PvE. And when I make videos like this, people are often like, what are you talking about, Lucky? You don't know what you're talking about. This scout rifle I have, it absolutely slaps in PvE. And I'm like, your scout rifle that you're talking to me about might slap with, you know, pulse monitor on it, but it probably is slapping in strikes. It's probably slapping in low-end PvE, and that's why you think it's so good and so awesome. I want to make this video mostly specifically for high-end PvE, okay? Low-end PvE is like patrols, strikes, you know, low-level nightfalls. High-end PvE is going to be stuff like high-level nightfalls, grandmasters, raids, etc., stuff like that. So you've got that. So first, let's make that dichotomy, okay? I'm not making a video of how to fly through strikes efficiently because that meta, that PvE meta, is very different than trying to beat the Vault of Glass in the first 24 hours or trying to beat a Grandmaster. It's a very different meta shift. So first off, I'm talking about the high-end PvE. Second thing we need to talk about, if we're talking about just pure raw efficiency and the most optimal DPS, that's an entirely different topic on the left again. That's an entirely different topic. But what we also need to talk about is pragmatic things that you actually need to have. For example, when you open up your artifact here, you'll notice that you have certain champion mods. You know, you have anti-barrier, overload, etc., and you have to create your build around these mods because, for example, if there's a ton of overload, unstoppables, inside Vault of Glass, you're going to need these mods and you're going to have to use these specific weapons, and they may not be the most optimal weapons in terms of raw damage output. You know what I'm saying? Like, for example, when you go fight Taniks, right? You use double slug shotguns in an Anarchy. That's become the meta, right? Because it works really well for that encounter. However, if there were a fuck ton of overload champions in there, right? It would change things quite a bit, wouldn't it? You know, if there were a bunch of overload champions roaming around when you're fighting Taniks, you wouldn't be able to just run double slugs. You'd have to do something different. And that's the really key important part that I want to cover in this, is that when I cover the meta, so I'm covering high-end PvE, and I'm taking into factor the champions and other variables that come when you do PvE. So that being said, we're going to go over the first build we're talking about. We've got the Izanagi's Burden, Icarus SMG, and Sleepless. The first build I always have to cover would be the Warmind Cell builds. If you're going to go into PvE, you have to at least have a mindset for these Warmind Cell stuff. It's so insane at clearing ads. They're going to be nerfing these Warmind Cells soon here. I don't know when the exact date of the nerf is, but they're going to be nerfing them soon. But for the time being, you know, using any of these 7 Seraph weapons are really strong, and you're going to see a really good amount of people inside Vault of Glass using a build similar to this one, where they use basically Izanagi's Burden and swap to an auto-loading rocket launcher. Now, it can be auto-loading, lasting impression, whatever it may be. This will be a really common build. What they use in their energy slot can change because, for example, if you're facing solar shields, or if they're anti-barrier and you need, you know, an auto rifle, for example, then they'll swap that around a little bit. But this is a really strong build right here. You'll see a lot of people using Izanagi's Burden, Icarus SMG, and Sleepless. Now, with this new artifact mod, you will see a lot more people using grenade launchers too, with Unstoppable and Breach and Clear. This is going to be really strong. So alternatively, you will see builds where people will use like a Succession with Reconstruction Vorpal. You'll see people use like an Anarchy to get that debuff, stuff like that. And from here on, I'm just going to go over specific weapons, okay? Because you can piece together which weapons you have and what builds you think will be the best. So the Succession you can get with Reconstruction Vorpal, super strong, best in slot for overall PvE damage. This will be part of the PvE meta, depending upon what build you want to use. I think a lot of people will stick to these grenade launchers, and I think that the debuff that comes with them is really strong, and people are going to use the Anarchy because of that reason. It's like the Anarchy, it's like almost a season of Anarchy, even though Anarchy doesn't necessarily have the best like burst damage. It does have really good overall damage output, especially with the debuff that it applies with the artifact mod that's in there. So along with that, this ignition code is crazy. You can get slide shot Vorpal on this. This is definitely going to be a part of the PvE meta, something you want to chase for. The Chroma Rush and the Seven Seraph. Now these, I purposely put these in here, not because they're meta by any means. These are not like efficient at clearing ads, but these are two weapons that you might want or to keep on your character when you're doing, Grandmasters later this season or Vault of Glass, etc. Because they're very good at, stopping the champions if you're having that anti-barrier champions, and you can create Warmind cells with the Seven Seraph. Auto rifle and the 450s did get buffed recently a little bit. There's a few different roles. I could go into massive detail about all the different roles, but overall, you're looking for your classic, add clear type weapons. So you're going to want damage buffs and stuff like that, fast reloads. Now, Seven Seraph Revolver can definitely be thrown in the mix here. You're going to want explosive rounds in this. It's actually bugged. Explosive rounds and bugs, and it just does 20% more damage across the board. So that's why the Seven Seraph Officer Revolver is thrown in here. It's actually quite a good weapon for that reason, because of that like bugged explosive rounds. And this will also help you with overload champions, so keep that in mind. Next up, we're going to go in the energy slot. Best in slot is going to be Frozen Orbit. If you have a triple tap Vorpal roll, this is going to be super strong for the PvE meta build. If you don't have that, the Adore is pretty easy to get. Obviously, everyone has it at this point, I would say. Triple tap Vorpal. Salvager Salvo will be a really strong weapon. I mean, it's got Vorpal already on it, so that's going to be easily within the meta, especially with all those grenade launcher mods there are in the artifact season. Divinity is something that you almost always want on your team. You may not want it as much if a bunch of people are using Star Eater Scales and Tether in the current meta, but Divinity is always great for creating that bigger crit, especially if you're playing on controller. Sometimes enemies are hard to hit with a controller because they have a little tiny crit spot, so Divinity makes it even easier and sweeter and much better to get that really optimal damage on bosses. I threw in the Shadow Price and the Nong Hung here. These are just two weapons that are good for the current champion mods right here. We have anti-barrier auto rifle. I would say auto rifles are significantly better than scout rifles in terms of damage output. So you're going to want to use these to clear ads. And then obviously if you need to stop any barrier champions, those are there for you. So that's covering the PvE meta in terms of these weapons. I went through and I spent like an hour scouring through all my weapons and, reviewing a bunch of different things, talking to my friends, making sure that I got all of this information as correct as possible. The Anarchy, again, obviously, do I even need to talk about this? This thing is a beast, right? This is one of the best exotics. Everyone knows that. Like I mentioned before, rockets are really strong right now. Auto-loading Vorpal. Linear fusions aren't half bad either, but I think that people are going to stick to rockets overall for damage output. And Lament, of course, is going to be really good for just taking out barrier champions if you can get close to them. Obviously, in high-end PvE, like when you push a barrier champion, it can be really risky because, they can easily shut you down, shut your whole team down in an instant. So you want to be careful with stuff like that. But Lament is just proven time and time again to just be an absolute beast, and the fact that it takes out barriers the way it does is really strong too. And then Xenophage is kind of like a, just a powerhouse exotic that people just tend to consistently use. It's not necessarily always the best exotic for any particular encounter, but it tends to be, really good overall and all-around exotic. Especially, I think this is especially good for like using controller because, it kind of just, you don't have to aim as precise with this weapon. So I think that a lot of people tend to like using this weapon as well. So Xenophage will be good for overall damage output. If I'm missing anything on this list, let me know in the comment section below, so that way people watching this video can go down to the comments and read. But overall, this is truly a really strong, if I'm looking at all these different weapons, whichever weapons you have in your vault right now, piece together what you like and find what you want to use for the meta inside the PvE. But overall, I really do think that a lot of people are going to be using this Izzy and Sleepless stuff, and if they don't use this, they're going to be going to something more like Succession and Anarchy. And obviously you can swap these weapons around. You could use, for example, this sniper and use this hand cannon and have the same overall effect, covering the variety of different champions there are in the game, etc. But I really think that those two are going to be the biggest exotics in the game right now. We're going to see a ton of Anarchy and a ton of Izanagi's Bird. But if I'm wrong, time will tell. We shall see. And that's a wrap for this video, though. The PvE meta in the first few days of Season 14. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Later.